Women remember their wedding day as the happiest moment of their lives, but Ashley Gardner remembered the day her husband told her to clean his shoes, as the moment she finally understood she had married a monster wearing expensive cologne. The Grand Livingston Hotel ballroom glittered with wealth that night, every surface reflecting light from chandeliers that cost more than entire homes. Ashley stood alone near a marble column, her fingers gripping a champagne flute she had not tasted, watching her husband Matt Short charm a circle of investors and their wives with stories she knew were exaggerations wrapped in lies. His laughter carried across the room, confident and careless, the sound of a man who had never faced consequences for anything he had ever done. The woman standing closest to him, a brunette in a red dress that probably cost thousands, touched his arm while laughing at something he whispered. Matt did not step away. He never did. Ashley wore a dress she bought from a clearance rack downtown, the best she could afford with money earned from doing secret alterations for the household staff after midnight when everyone else slept. The fabric was meant to look like silk, but felt like plastic against her skin, and she had sewn the hem herself because taking it to a tailor would have raised questions she could not answer. Questions like why the wife of Matt Short needed to penny pinch for clothing. Questions that would reveal she received no money from her husband, no allowance, no access to the accounts that supposedly made her a wealthy woman by marriage. She was as poor now as she had been working double shifts at the laundromat, except now she lived in a mansion and starved in private. The evening had crawled by with excruciating slowness. Ashley arrived with Matt, but he abandoned her at the entrance, walking away mid-sentence when an older gentleman called his name. She drifted to this corner and stayed there, watching couples dance and groups laugh and waiters circulate with trays of food she was too anxious to eat. Nobody spoke to her. The Short family had made it clear over these years that Ashley was not to be acknowledged in social settings, and New York society followed their lead. To speak with her was to insult the Shorts. To ignore her was to maintain favor with one of the city's most powerful families. The choice was obvious. Diane Short, Matt's mother, swept past at one point wearing diamonds that could fund a hospital wing. She glanced at Ashley with an expression of mild distaste, the way someone might look at a stain on expensive upholstery, then continued to her destination without pausing. Thomas Short, Matt's father, had nodded once in Ashley's direction earlier in the evening, the only member of the family who occasionally acknowledged her existence, though never with warmth or kindness. Just acknowledgement that she occupied space in his world. The night might have ended like so many others, with Ashley riding home in silence beside a drunk husband who would stumble to his room and forget she existed until the next social obligation required a wife's presence. But then Matt spilled his drink. He was gesturing dramatically while telling some story, his whiskey tumbler tilting too far, and the amber liquid splashed across his chest and down onto those ridiculous Italian leather shoes he was so proud of. The shoes that cost more than most people earned in weeks of hard labor. Matt looked down at the stain spreading across the leather, and his face transformed. The charming smile vanished, replaced by something cold and cruel that Ashley recognized immediately because she saw it often behind closed doors. He scanned the room until his eyes found her in the corner, and then he raised his voice loud enough that conversations nearby stuttered to silence. "Ashley, get over here." She felt her stomach drop. The nearby guests turned to watch, their expressions shifting from curiosity to anticipation. Someone was about to be humiliated, and the crowd sensed blood in the water. Ashley set down her champagne flute and walked across the marble floor, each step echoing in her ears like a countdown to disaster. Matt watched her approach with eyes that held no recognition of their wedding vows, no memory of promises made, no acknowledgement that she was his wife and deserved basic human dignity. When she reached him, he pointed down at his shoes without looking at her face. "Clean them, now." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and unmistakable. Around them the guests had gone completely quiet. Even the orchestra seemed to soften, Or maybe that was just Ashley's mind trying to process what was happening. She looked at the shoes, then at Matt's face, then at the crowd watching with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed amusement. An elderly woman in pearls raised her eyebrows. A younger couple exchanged glances. Someone pulled out a phone and held it up, recording. "Matt, I cannot—" Ashley's voice came out barely above a whisper. She tried again, forcing strength into the words. "I will not do that." His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, fingers digging in hard enough to hurt. He pulled her closer, so his face was inches from hers, his breath reeking of whiskey and rage. "You will do what I tell you, or I will divorce you tomorrow morning, and you can go back to whatever gutter my mother pulled you from. Do you understand me?" She understood. She understood that he meant every word. She understood that his parents would support him. She understood that she had no legal protection, no money of her own, nowhere to go if he followed through on the threat. She understood that she had spent these years building a prison around herself, one compromised moment at a time, and now the walls had closed in completely. But she also understood something else, something that crystallized in that moment with perfect clarity. She understood that she would rather face any uncertain future than spend another second pretending this marriage was anything but an elaborate form of torture. Ashley pulled her wrist free from his grip with surprising strength, the motion sudden enough that Matt stumbled slightly. She looked directly into his eyes and spoke loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "No." Then she turned and walked away. Not quickly. Not running, just walking with her spine straight and her head high, moving through the crowd that parted to let her pass. Behind her, she heard Matt call her name once, then curse. She heard murmurs spreading through the ballroom, like ripples on water. She heard Diane Short's sharp intake of breath and someone's nervous laughter. But she did not stop walking. She crossed the entire length of that glittering ballroom, pushed through the heavy doors into the hotel lobby, and kept going until she reached the street. The December cold hit her like a slap, her thin coat doing nothing to protect against the wind cutting between buildings. She had $17 in her small purse. No credit cards because Matt never gave her any. No bank account in her own name because he said wives did not need such things. Nowhere to go because the only home she had known for these years was the Short mansion, and she would cut off her own hand before returning there tonight. The city stretched around her in all directions, millions of people living their lives behind lit windows, and she had never felt more alone. Ashley walked to the nearest bus stop and sat on the cold bench, watching taxis pass and couples stroll by holding hands, living in a world that seemed impossibly distant from her own. She thought about calling someone, but who? She had lost touch with every friend during the marriage because Matt made it clear that socializing was inappropriate for someone in her position. Her stepmother Regina had sold her to the Short family for cash and made it clear she wanted nothing more to do with her. She had no one, nothing, just the clothes on her back and $17 and the crushing weight of understanding that she had just walked away from the only security she possessed. But as she sat there shivering in the darkness, something else stirred beneath the fear and despair. Something small but fierce, an ember of defiance that Matt's cruelty had somehow failed to extinguish completely. She had said no. For the first time in her marriage, she had refused him in front of everyone and walked away with her dignity intact. It was a tiny victory that would probably cost her everything, but it was hers. They could not take it back. They could not erase it. For one perfect moment, she had been powerful instead of powerless, and the memory of that feeling burned bright enough to warm her just slightly against the cold. When the bus finally arrived, Ashley climbed aboard and paid her fare, not knowing where she would go, but knowing she could never go back. Behind her, in that glittering ballroom, her husband stood with whiskey-stained shoes and a fury that would not fade quickly. Ahead of her lay only uncertainty and struggle. But somewhere deep in her mind, a memory stirred from childhood. Her mother's voice saying something about an envelope hidden in an attic. Words that had seemed meaningless at the time, but now whispered possibility into the darkness. If she could just remember, if she could just find it. If there was anything left in this world that might save her, it would have to come from her mother, the only person who had ever truly loved her. The bus pulled away from the curb, carrying Ashley into a future she could not imagine, leaving behind the shattered fragments of a life that had never been hers to begin with. Chapter 2. 3 years of invisible cruelty. They say time heals all wounds. But Ashley had learned that time could also be a weapon, each day adding another invisible scar until you forgot what your skin looked like before it was covered in marks nobody else could see. The marriage began on a Tuesday morning at City Hall with no flowers, no music, no guests beyond the 2 witnesses required by law. Matt arrived late, smelling of alcohol and cologne that could not quite mask the evidence of whatever he had been doing the night before. His parents stood near the window looking at their phones, making no pretense of joy or celebration. Regina, Ashley's stepmother, collected her envelope of cash from Diane Short and left without saying goodbye to the stepdaughter she had just sold like furniture at an estate sale. The judge pronounced them married in a monotone voice that suggested he performed this ceremony dozens of times daily and found nothing special about any of them. Matt signed the papers without looking at her. They walked out into the sunshine, and he drove them to the Short mansion in silence. His jaw clenched the entire way, as though the act of marrying her had been a physical ordeal he was still recovering from. The housekeeper, a stern woman named Patricia, who had worked for the Shorts for decades, showed Ashley to her room. Not the master bedroom where wives traditionally slept. Not even a guest room on the family floor. A small space in the servants' wing with a narrow bed and a window overlooking the garbage bins. Patricia explained the household schedule without expression, making it clear through tone alone that Ashley occupied the bottom of every hierarchy that mattered. Breakfast was served at 7, but Ashley would eat in the kitchen after the family finished. Laundry was done on Tuesdays and Fridays, and Ashley could wash her own things separately. The family wing was off limits unless specifically summoned. Questions should be directed to Patricia, not to any member of the Short family directly. "What about Matt?" Ashley had asked, her voice small in that cold room. "Where does my husband sleep?" Patricia looked at her with something that might have been pity if it was not quite so dismissive. "Mr. Matthew has the entire West Wing. You will see him when he requires your presence, I imagine." That first week, Ashley barely saw him at all. He left early for whatever he did during the days, and returned late, often drunk, sometimes with friends, who laughed too loudly in the halls below. She spent her time trying to understand her place in this house, wandering the servants' areas and learning which doors she could open and which would earn her sharp reprimands from Patricia. She offered to help with household tasks, desperate for something to do with her hands and her mind, but Patricia informed her that Diane Short had left specific instructions. Ashley was to make herself useful, but not too visible. She could clean the common areas, but only when guests were not present. She could help with laundry, but must never touch the family's more delicate garments. She could prepare vegetables in the kitchen, but never cook the actual meals. Basically, she could do the work nobody else wanted, while remaining invisible enough that her presence would not embarrass the family who had reluctantly absorbed her into their world. The first real cruelty came during her second week as a married woman. Diane Short summoned her to the main dining room, a cavernous space with a table that could seat 20 beneath an antique chandelier. Diane sat at the head of the table eating lunch, while Ashley stood near the door, unsure whether to approach or wait. After several minutes of being ignored while Diane finished her soup, the older woman finally looked up with eyes that held no warmth whatsoever. "You are aware, I assume, that you are an embarrassment to this family." Ashley said nothing, having learned already that responses were not expected or welcome. "My son married you because we needed to settle him before his behavior destroyed what my husband spent decades building. You were convenient and cheap, which are your only relevant qualities. I want to be very clear about your position here. You are not a daughter to me. You are not a cherished member of this household. You are a legal arrangement that I hope will end soon when Matthew tires of this ridiculous experiment. In the meantime, you will make yourself scarce. You will not speak to our guests. You will not attend family meals unless specifically required for appearances. You will certainly not embarrass us by attempting to insert yourself into our social circles. Do you understand? Yes, Ashley whispered. Yes, what? Yes, Mrs. Short. Diane smiled then, a thin expression that contained no joy. Good, you learn quickly. That will make this tolerable for all of us. The months that followed taught Ashley the infinite variations of cruelty that could be inflicted without ever raising a hand in violence. Matt ignored her completely, unless he needed someone to blame for his bad moods. He would call her to his wing of the house and unleash torrents of complaints about everything from the weather to his father's demands to the stock market. Speaking to her as though she were a therapist he held in contempt. When he finished venting, he would dismiss her with a wave of his hand, sometimes mid-sentence, already forgetting she existed before she reached the door. He never asked about her day, never inquired if she needed anything, never acknowledged that she might be a person with thoughts or feelings worth considering. Thomas Short was only marginally better. He occasionally nodded at her in hallways, acknowledging her existence in the same way he might acknowledge a piece of furniture that served its purpose adequately. Once, when she accidentally interrupted a phone call by entering a room she thought was empty, he covered the receiver and told her coldly that skulking around the house like a thief was unbecoming. She should announce her presence before entering rooms. She should make herself known, or better yet, she should stay in her assigned areas where she belonged. The poker night incident happened during her first winter in the house. Matt hosted 5 college friends in the mansion's game room and sent for Ashley to serve drinks and empty ashtrays. She moved quietly around the room while they played, trying to be invisible. After the second round of drinks, one friend named Garrett started making comments. "So this is the famous wife. Not what I expected, Matthew." The men laughed. Matt shrugged without looking up from his cards. "She serves her purpose. Which purpose is that exactly?" More laughter. Another friend leaned back to study her. "And how much did this arrangement cost anyway?" "Nothing worth mentioning," Matt replied. "My mother handled the details." Convenient timing. When Ashley was refilling a glass, her hand trembled and bourbon splashed onto an expensive sleeve. The guest cursed, jerking back, and Matt's expression transformed into something dark and dangerous. "Stand in the corner. Face the wall. Do not move until I tell you." She hesitated, not understanding, and his voice rose to a shout. "Now!" Ashley stood facing the wall for 2 hours, while the men threw peanut shells at her back and laughed. When the game ended and guests left, Matt walked past without a word. Patricia found her near midnight and told her she could return to her room. Holidays were particularly brutal because they required her presence for appearances. Thanksgiving dinner that first year involved sitting at the far end of the table while the Short family and their guests filled every other seat. She was introduced vaguely as Matthew's wife, without anyone using her name. When she tried to contribute to a conversation about charity work, mentioning that she had volunteered at a food bank before the marriage, Diane cut her off mid-sentence. "Nobody asked for your input, dear. Perhaps you could focus on learning which fork to use instead of sharing stories that only highlight your unfortunate background." The table went silent for a moment before someone changed the subject, and Ashley spent the rest of the meal staring at her plate, pushing food around without tasting anything. Christmas was worse because it came with the expectation of gift exchanges. Ashley had been doing alterations secretly for some of the household staff, earning small amounts of cash that she hid in her room. She saved for months and bought Matt a watch she saw him admire in a shop window, a beautiful piece that cost her everything she had managed to accumulate. She wrapped it carefully and left it on his bed with a note expressing hope that they might find some happiness together in the new year. Matt opened it at breakfast the next morning while his mother watched. He examined the watch, turned it over, read the brand name on the face and laughed. Actually laughed, the sound sharp and mocking. Is this from a discount store? Diane, look at this. She bought me a watch from some cheap outlet mall. Diane glanced at it without interest. How thoughtful. I'm sure the gardener will appreciate it more than you will. That afternoon, Ashley saw their head gardener Miguel wearing the watch while trimming hedges. Matt had given it away within hours, telling the man it was too cheap for someone in the Short family to wear, but might suit someone of his station. Miguel looked uncomfortable accepting it, clearly understanding the insult embedded in the gesture, but he could not refuse a gift from his employer's son. The cruelest aspect of the marriage, though, was its absolute emptiness. In those years as husband and wife, Matt never touched her with anything resembling affection, never kissed her except once at the wedding ceremony when legally required, never held her hand or put his arm around her shoulders or did any of the small, intimate gestures that married couples share. He never came to her room, and she was never invited to his. There were no passionate nights, no tender mornings, no moments of connection that might suggest they were anything but strangers forced to occupy the same building. She was legally his wife, but functionally invisible, a ghost haunting her own marriage. She tried in those early months to bridge the distance between them. She left notes suggesting they have dinner together. She asked about his day when they passed in hallways. She offered to accompany him to events where spouses were expected. Every attempt was rebuffed either through direct rejection or simple indifference. Eventually, she stopped trying, understanding that Matt did not want a wife. He wanted a legal arrangement that satisfied his parents' demands while requiring nothing from him emotionally. She could have been a mannequin and served the same purpose. The worst part was not the cruelty itself, but the way it became normalized over time. The first insult shocked her. The 10th made her flinch. The 100th barely registered. She developed an internal numbness that protected her from the constant degradation, a psychological callus that grew thicker each day until she could barely remember what it felt like to be treated with basic human dignity. She forgot she deserved better because she was never shown evidence that better existed. She accepted her role as lesser, as unworthy, as fortunate to have shelter and food, even if the price was her complete erasure as a person. By the time the Christmas party arrived, Ashley had been married for 3 years and could not remember the woman she was before. That woman had dreams of becoming a fashion designer, of creating beautiful things that made people feel confident and valued. That woman believed in love and partnership and the possibility of building a life worth living. That woman died slowly in a servant's room in a mansion full of people who would not acknowledge her existence. In her place was someone hollowed out and nearly broken, someone who had forgotten how to hope, because hope only made the disappointment more painful. But something small and fierce still lived beneath all that trauma and conditioning. Some core part of her that remembered her mother's love and refused to be completely extinguished. When Matt demanded she clean his shoes that night, that small, fierce thing finally found its voice and said no. It was the first word of rebellion she had spoken in 3 years, and once it left her mouth, there was no taking it back. The walls she had been building around herself for protection suddenly became the walls of her prison. And she understood with perfect clarity that she could either die slowly inside those walls or tear them down and face whatever waited beyond. She chose to tear them down, which was why she now sat on a bus heading into the December darkness with nowhere to go and nobody to turn to, feeling terrified and lost, but also, for the first time in years, awake. Chapter 3. The Night of Nowhere. Some people believe rock bottom has a flaw, but Ashley discovered that night that you can always fall further than you thought possible. The bus carried her across the city through neighborhoods that grew progressively less familiar, past buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support, and streetlights that flickered like dying stars. She had one destination in mind because she had nowhere else to go. Regina's apartment in Queens, the place Ashley had lived before the marriage, before the transaction that sold her to the Short family. She knew Regina would not welcome her. They had barely spoken since the wedding, but desperation made people reach for unlikely lifelines, and Ashley was drowning. The bus ride took forever, each stop dragging out the inevitable, each red light giving her time to imagine different versions of the conversation ahead. Maybe Regina would feel guilty about what she had done. Maybe enough time had passed to soften her stepmother's heart. Maybe there was some scrap of family loyalty buried beneath the years of resentment and indifference. These fantasies occupied her mind while the city scrolled past the windows. But deep down, Ashley knew they were just stories she told herself to make the fear more bearable. Regina had made her feelings clear when she sold her stepdaughter for cash. Everything that happened after was just aftermath. The apartment building looked smaller than Ashley remembered, shabbier somehow, though probably nothing had changed except her perspective. She stood on the sidewalk staring up at the window where a light still burned, gathering courage she did not feel. The December wind cut through her thin coat and made her bones ache. She could see her breath in clouds before her face. Around her, the neighborhood slept or tried to. The sounds of televisions and arguments bleeding through walls, the smell of cooking and exhaust mingling in the cold air. This was the world she came from, the world the Short family looked down on from their mansion height. Standing here now, Ashley felt caught between two realities, belonging to neither. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step echoing in the concrete stairwell. The hallway on the third floor smelled of cigarettes and old carpet. She stopped in front of Regina's door and knocked before she could change her mind. Footsteps approached from inside, then silence as someone looked through the peephole. More silence. Then the sound of locks turning. Regina opened the door, wearing a bathrobe and an expression that made Ashley's stomach drop. There was no surprise in her stepmother's face, no concern, just immediate irritation, like Ashley was a telemarketer interrupting her evening. "What are you doing here?" "I left him. I left Matt. I need somewhere to stay just for a few days while I figure things out." Regina's laugh was short and humorless. "You left him? The millionaire husband I found for you. You walked away from that life because what, he hurt your feelings? He treated me like garbage for 3 years. Tonight, he humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. I could not stay there anymore. So you came here expecting what exactly? That I would take you in, feed you, support you like some kind of charity case. You are my stepmother. I'm nothing to you," Regina interrupted, her voice rising. "I did my obligation when I arranged that marriage. You were supposed to be set for life. You were supposed to marry into money, and I would finally be free of the burden your father left me with when he drank himself to death. I collected my payment, and we were done. If you are stupid enough to walk away from security because you do not like being told what to do, that is your problem to solve." Ashley felt something crumble inside her chest. She had expected rejection, but hearing it stated so bluntly hurt more than she anticipated. "I have nowhere else to go. That is not my concern. I have a boyfriend living here now, Derek. He pays half the rent, which means the spare bedroom is his. There is no room for you, and there is no reason for you to be here. Regina, please. Just a few nights. I will sleep on the couch. I will not be in the way." Her stepmother's face hardened into something ugly and final. "Go back to your husband and apologize for whatever tantrum you threw. Beg him to take you back. Tell him you will be better behaved. Use whatever assets you have to convince him, because you have nothing else going for you, Ashley. No education, no skills, no prospects. You think the world is going to treat you better than he did? At least with him you had a roof over your head. Without him, you are just another poor girl who will end up exactly where she started, nowhere." The door closed with a finality that echoed through the hallway. Ashley stood there staring at the painted wood, her hand still raised from knocking, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. She heard movement inside the apartment, voices in conversation, then silence. Regina was done with her. Everyone was done with her. She walked back down the stairs and out into the cold, her body moving automatically while her brain shut down to protect itself from the full weight of her situation. She had $17, no credit cards, no phone because Matt controlled the account and probably cancelled her service already. No friends because the marriage had isolated her completely. No job skills beyond alterations and laundry. Nowhere to go except back to the mansion, which would mean crawling to Matt and begging forgiveness and accepting whatever punishment he devised for her rebellion. The thought made her physically ill. Ashley walked aimlessly for a while, her feet carrying her through streets she barely noticed. She passed closed shops and late-night diners and groups of young people laughing outside bars, all of them living in a world that suddenly seemed impossibly distant from her own. She had no plan, no destination, just movement to keep from freezing in place. Eventually, she found herself at a subway entrance and descended into the underground warmth, grateful for any shelter from the wind. She sank onto a bench and pulled her coat tight around her body, watching trains arrive and depart, carrying people to homes and lives she could not imagine. A few travelers glanced at her with expressions ranging from indifference to concern, but nobody stopped to ask if she needed help. In a city of millions, it was surprisingly easy to be completely alone. The hours dragged by with dreamlike slowness. Ashley dozed fitfully on the bench, jerking awake every time a train arrived or a stranger passed too close. Her back ached. Her feet throbbed in shoes not meant for walking. Her mind circled endlessly through the same thoughts, looking for solutions that did not exist, replaying conversations with different endings, imagining futures that all led to nowhere. Around 4 in the morning, a man in a transit worker uniform approached, carrying a metal lunchbox. He was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes and the sort of face that suggested he had seen enough of life to understand suffering when he encountered it. He stopped in front of Ashley's bench and studied her for a moment before speaking. "You all right, miss? Been sitting here since I started my shift. That is a long time to be waiting for a train." "I am fine," Ashley lied, her voice hollow. "Do not look fine to me." He opened his lunchbox and pulled out a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Here, I packed 2 because I always pack 2, but I am never hungry enough to eat both. Sandwich and some coffee if you want it." The kindness broke something in Ashley that cruelty had never managed to crack completely. Tears welled up and spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Months and years of suppressed pain finally finding release. The transit worker sat down beside her, not too close, just a comfortable presence, while she sobbed into her hands. He did not ask questions or offer advice. He just sat there being human, in a way nobody had been to her in so long she had forgotten what it felt like. When the crying finally subsided, Ashley accepted the sandwich with shaking hands. It was just peanut butter and jelly, but it tasted like the best meal she had ever eaten, because it came from genuine kindness with no strings attached. The coffee was lukewarm and too sweet, but she drank it gratefully, feeling warmth spread through her body. "Thank you," she whispered. "You have no idea what this means." "Been down myself sometimes," the transit worker said quietly. "Know what it is like when the world gets small and dark. But things change. Maybe not fast, maybe not easy, but they change. You just got to outlast the darkness until the light comes back around." He left shortly after, heading home to whatever life he led beyond this subway platform. And Ashley sat alone again, with her sandwich and her coffee, and the first small spark of hope she had felt in longer than she could measure. A stranger had shown her kindness. That meant kindness still existed. If kindness existed, maybe other good things existed too. Maybe survival was possible. Maybe there was a path forward she had not seen yet. As dawn began to lighten the sky above ground, Ashley thought about her mother. Miriam had died when Ashley was just 12, cancer taking her slowly while they lived in poverty because Ashley's father had gambled away everything they owned. She remembered the hospital room where her mother spent the final weeks, the smell of disinfectant and suffering, the way Miriam's hand felt like paper in her own. But she also remembered something else, something that had seemed strange and meaningless at the time, but now burned in her memory with sudden urgency. 2 years before she died, when Ashley was 10 years old, Miriam had taken her hand during a quiet evening at home. They were sitting on the couch in their shabby apartment watching television when her mother muted the sound and turned to face her with an intensity that made Ashley pay attention. "I need you to remember something very important. Our old house, the one we lived in before everything fell apart, it still exists. Do you remember the address?" "I think so. The place with the blue door?" "Yes. I need you to memorize that address. Can you do that for me?" Miriam made her repeat it several times until she was confident Ashley would not forget. Then she continued speaking in that same intense tone. "In the attic of that house, there is a blue metal box hidden under the insulation near the chimney. Inside that box is an envelope. You must promise me you will never open it unless you absolutely need to. Not until you have nowhere else to turn and no other options left. Do you understand? What is in it?" "Something I saved for you. Something that will help when the time comes. But you have to promise me, Ashley. Only when you need it most. Only when everything else has failed." Ashley had promised, confused but willing to trust her mother. A few months later, Miriam's cancer returned with a vengeance. 18 months after that, she was gone. In the chaos and grief that followed, in the years living with Regina and enduring her father's drinking and eventual death, Ashley had forgotten about the conversation entirely. It was just one of many memories from her mother, buried under layers of survival and suffering. But now, sitting in a subway station with nowhere to go, the memory blazed in her mind with perfect clarity. The old house with the blue door, the attic, the metal box, the envelope that would help when she needed it most. This was that moment. This was rock bottom, with no floor beneath her. If ever there was a time to open her mother's envelope, surely it was now. Ashley stood up from the bench, her legs stiff from sitting for hours, but her mind suddenly focused and clear. She knew where the old house was, assuming it still stood after all these years. She knew what she was looking for. Whether the box still existed, whether the envelope contained anything useful, whether this would turn out to be just another disappointment, she would not know until she tried. But it was the only thread of possibility she had left to pull, and she would chase it until the thread snapped or led somewhere better than this subway platform at dawn. She climbed the stairs back to street level and emerged into the morning light. The city, waking around her with all its noise and movement and indifferent energy. The old house was miles away, in a neighborhood she had not visited in over a decade. Getting there with $17 and no transport would be a challenge. But Ashley was done being passive, done waiting for someone to save her, done accepting that powerlessness was her natural state. Her mother had left her something. She was going to find it. Chapter 4. The Envelope That Changed Everything. Miriam Gardner had died believing poverty was a kind of armor that protected what truly mattered, and she spent her final breath making sure her daughter would survive long enough to understand what she meant. The bus ride to Ashley's old neighborhood took 90 minutes and cost her 3 of her precious remaining dollars, leaving her with 14 and change that would not get her much further if this turned out to be a chase toward nothing. She sat near the back, watching the city transform through the windows, the buildings growing shorter and more tired, the streets narrower and lined with cars that had seen too many winters. This was where she grew up, after her father's gambling destroyed their original stability. The place where Miriam worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, while cancer grew in her body undetected. The world the short family would have found unimaginable in its struggle and ordinariness. She got off at a corner she remembered and walked the remaining blocks to the old house, passing landmarks from childhood that looked smaller now. The bodega where she bought candy with coins saved from lunch money. The park where she played while her mother worked late shifts. The school building where she learned to read and dream and believe that life might be different someday. All of it still existed, weathered but standing, marking time in a neighborhood that changed slowly, if at all. The house itself shocked her with its shabbiness. In her memories, it had been respectable, modest but maintained, a place her mother kept clean despite everything. Now it looked exhausted, the paint peeling in long strips, the yard overgrown with weeds pushing through cracked concrete. Someone still lived here, though. Curtains hung in the windows and a car sat in the driveway, old but functional. Ashley stood on the sidewalk, gathering courage, knowing she would sound insane, asking strangers if she could search their attic for something her dead mother supposedly hid over a decade ago. She walked up the path and knocked on the door, each rap of her knuckles feeling like an invitation to disappointment. Footsteps approached from inside, slow and careful. The door opened a crack and an elderly woman peered out, her face lined with suspicion born from years of urban living, where unexpected knocks rarely brought good news. "I am sorry to bother you," Ashley began, speaking quickly before the door could close. "My name is Ashley Gardner. I used to live in this house when I was a child. My mother was Miriam Gardner." The woman's expression softened slightly at the mention of a name and a history that made this less threatening. "Gardner. That was before we bought the place. Long time ago." "Yes, ma'am. I know this sounds strange, but my mother told me she left something for me in the attic. A metal box hidden near the chimney. I would not ask, except I really need to find it. It would only take a few minutes to look. I promise I'm not trying to cause trouble." The woman studied her for a long moment, taking in the rumpled discount store dress, the cheap coat, the desperation that Ashley could not quite hide. Whatever she saw must have convinced her, because she opened the door wider and called over her shoulder into the house. "George, there is a young woman here says she used to live here as a child, wants to look in the attic for something her mother left behind." A man appeared beside her, equally elderly, with suspenders and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He looked Ashley up and down with the careful assessment of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize genuine need when it appeared on his doorstep. "What did you say your mother's name was?" "Miriam Gardner. We lived here when I was little. She died of cancer when I was 12. Before she passed, she told me about something hidden in the attic that I should look for if I ever needed help. I need help now." George exchanged a glance with his wife that seemed to communicate an entire conversation without words. Then he nodded and stepped back, opening the door fully. "Come in, then. We are the Pattersons. Bought this place about 15 years back. Never been in the attic much except to check for leaks when it rains. You are welcome to look, though I cannot promise anything is still up there after all this time." The house interior had changed completely from Ashley's memories. Different furniture, different paint colors, different lives lived in rooms she used to know. But the bones of the structure remained the same. And when Mrs. Patterson led her to the hallway, where a ceiling panel accessed the attic, Ashley felt a wave of recognition that brought tears to her eyes. She had stood in this exact spot, watching her mother climb into that darkness, never understanding why. Mr. Patterson pulled down the panel and unfolded a ladder that creaked under its own weight. He gestured for Ashley to climb first, following behind with a flashlight that barely penetrated the gloom above. The attic was cramped and hot, despite the winter cold outside, the air thick with dust and insulation particles that made breathing difficult. Exposed beams crossed the space like ribs, and the chimney rose through the center exactly as Ashley remembered from her mother's description. "Near the chimney, you said?" Mr. Patterson aimed his flashlight toward the brick column, while Ashley crawled across the joists, careful not to step through the insulation into the ceiling below. Her hands felt through the fiberglass batting that itched against her skin, searching for anything solid and metal-shaped. Cobwebs clung to her hair. Dust coated her dress. She was about to give up, about to accept that maybe the box never existed or had been removed by previous owners or was just a dying woman's confused memory, when her fingers closed around something hard and rectangular buried beneath layers of insulation near the chimney base. She pulled it free and held it up to the flashlight beam. A blue metal box, exactly as her mother described, covered in dust and cobwebs, but intact. The sight of it made Ashley's heart hammer so hard, she thought Mr. Patterson must be able to hear it in the silence. She wiped the lid with her sleeve and found the latch, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work it open. Inside lay a thick manila envelope, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age but still held firm. Ashley pulled it out and stared at her mother's handwriting on the front. "For Ashley, when you need it most. I love you forever, Mom." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. She clutched the envelope against her chest and sat there in the dusty attic crying silently, while Mr. Patterson politely looked away, giving her privacy for grief that had waited over a decade to be fully felt. When she could breathe normally again, Ashley opened the envelope carefully, terrified it might contain nothing useful, or that time had destroyed whatever was inside. But the contents were perfectly preserved, protected by the envelope and the attic's dry heat. Legal documents, birth certificates, death certificates, papers with law firm letterheads and official seals, and a letter in her mother's handwriting explaining everything. She read by flashlight while Mr. Patterson waited patiently, and with each sentence, the world she thought she understood rearranged itself into something completely different. Her mother was not just Miriam Gardner, poor woman married to a gambling addict. She was Miriam Holloway, sole heir to the Holloway textile fortune, one of the old New York families whose factories and patents had generated enormous wealth in the early 20th century. When Miriam fell in love with Ashley's father, Bernard, and insisted on marrying him, despite her family's violent objections, they disowned her completely. Cut her off, refused to acknowledge her existence, let her struggle in poverty as punishment for choosing love over money. But Miriam's grandmother, Dorothy, who died when Ashley was just a baby, could not bear to see her favorite granddaughter destroyed forever. Dorothy secretly created an irrevocable trust that kept the Holloway fortune intact and protected. If Miriam ever left Bernard and reclaimed her maiden name, she could access everything. If she stayed married, the trust would remain untouched until her death, at which point the entire estate would transfer to her direct descendants with specific conditions. They had to claim it in person before turning 30. They had to prove their identity through DNA and documentation, and they had to understand why Miriam kept it secret. The letter explained everything in her mother's careful handwriting. Bernard would have destroyed them both if he knew about the money. He would have forced Miriam to claim it and then gambled it away, leaving Ashley with nothing. He was violent when drunk and desperate when sober, a man whose addiction controlled every decision. Miriam chose poverty and suffering to protect her daughter's future. She let cancer eat her body in a county hospital because she could not afford better care, all to ensure that someday Ashley would have the inheritance Dorothy protected. The money was managed by the law firm of Whitmore and Associates, invested carefully over decades, growing substantially beyond its original value. The final page of the letter contained the current estimated worth of the estate based on the most recent appraisal. Ashley read the number 3 times before her brain could process what she was seeing. $720 million. Her mother had sat on a fortune while dying in poverty, protecting it with silence and sacrifice, ensuring it would be there when her daughter needed it most. Ashley sat in that attic holding papers that represented a completely different life, unable to reconcile the woman she had been yesterday with the person these documents said she could become. Everything she thought she understood about her mother, about herself, about the world and how it worked, had just been revealed as incomplete. She was not the poor discarded girl the Short family believed her to be. She was the heir to a fortune that dwarfed their own wealth, hidden in plain sight for over a decade, waiting for her to be desperate enough to look. Mr. Patterson's voice broke through her shock. "Find what you needed?" "Yes," Ashley whispered. "I found everything." They climbed back down from the attic, and Mrs. Patterson offered her water and a bathroom to wash the dust from her hands and face. The Pattersons asked no questions about what she found, respecting privacy in a way that made Ashley grateful for strangers who could still be kind without demanding explanations. When she was ready to leave, Mr. Patterson offered to drive her wherever she needed to go. Seeing something in her face that suggested walking was not appropriate for whatever had just changed. Ashley gave him the address for Whitmore and Associates in Lower Manhattan. The law firm listed on all the documents. The drive took them back across the city, Mr. Patterson maintaining comfortable silence, while Ashley stared out the window, watching her old life recede behind her and a new one approach with terrifying speed. She had walked into that house as a homeless woman with $14 and nowhere to go. She was leaving as the secret heir to a fortune that could buy anything except the years her mother sacrificed to protect it. The Whitmore and Associates building was old Manhattan money, all dignified stone and brass that spoke of institutions that outlasted individual lifetimes. Ashley thanked Mr. Patterson for his kindness, watching him drive away before turning to face the heavy doors. She still wore her rumpled discount store dress and cheap coat. She probably looked like someone who had slept in a subway station, because that is exactly what she was. But she had her mother's envelope and her own determination, and sometimes that was enough to open doors that seemed impossible to breach. She walked through those doors and approached the reception desk with her spine straight and her voice steady, refusing to apologize for her appearance or her presence. The receptionist looked skeptical until Ashley placed the documents on the desk and spoke the words that would change everything. "My name is Ashley Gardner. I am the daughter of Miriam Holloway Gardner. I'm here to claim my inheritance." Chapter 5. The Education of Power. Nobody tells you that money cannot buy confidence, but it can buy the time and space necessary to build it yourself. The senior partners at Whitmore and Associates treated Ashley with a combination of relief and respect that felt surreal after years of being treated as disposable. Howard Whitmore himself, a dignified man in his 70s with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many family fortunes lost to stupidity or greed, explained that they had been searching for her for over 2 years. Hired investigators tracked her to the laundromat where she worked before the marriage, but by the time they arrived to make contact, she had already vanished into the Short family mansion. The mansion's security measures and the Short family's obsessive privacy made reaching her directly impossible. Letters sent to the mansion address were intercepted by household staff under orders from Diane Short to screen all mail for threats or unwanted solicitations. Ashley's letters apparently qualified as unwanted. "We were preparing to file a petition with the court to publish a public notice," Howard explained, sitting across from her in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. "It would have been our last option before the trust conditions expired. Your mother's grandmother Dorothy was very specific. You had to claim the inheritance before turning 30, or it would revert to a charitable foundation. You have time, but not an abundance of it." Ashley sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than she earned in months at the laundromat, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening. A DNA test would verify her identity through comparison with biological samples from Dorothy Holloway, held in trust specifically for this purpose. The process would take several days. In the meantime, the firm arranged for her to stay in a hotel suite they maintained for clients, gave her a modest advance against her inheritance for immediate expenses, and began explaining the full scope of what she was about to possess. The portfolio made her dizzy. A 14-story commercial building in Midtown Manhattan, generating millions annually in rental income. 3 residential properties in Brooklyn that had appreciated enormously as the neighborhoods transformed. Substantial shares in 8 major corporations, including 2 whose names even Ashley recognized from television advertisements. The original Holloway textile patents, that continued paying royalties decades after the factories closed. A diversified investment portfolio managed conservatively by experts who understood that protecting wealth was more important than chasing dramatic gains. And liquid assets in the millions, money sitting in accounts earning interest while waiting for her to claim it. Why did my mother never use any of this? Ashley asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She died in a county hospital because we could not afford better care. She worked herself to exhaustion. We lived in poverty. Why? Howard's expression softened with something that might have been sadness or admiration or both. Your mother came to see my father once, about 6 months before she died. My father handled the trust for Dorothy and maintained it after her death. Miriam sat in this same conference room and asked about her options. She could leave your father, reclaim her maiden name, and access everything immediately. Or she could stay married and protect the inheritance for you. My father laid out both paths very clearly. Do you know what she said? Ashley shook her head, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. She said that Bernard Gardner was a broken man who would destroy anything valuable he touched. If she claimed the inheritance, he would find ways to access it, manipulate her, steal from her, gamble it away until nothing remained. But if she died without ever claiming it, you would inherit everything on your own terms. She said she was dying anyway, the cancer had spread too far, and she wanted her death to mean something. She wanted you to have a chance at a life she could not give you while she was alive. The tears came then, hot and unstoppable, grief and gratitude tangled together until Ashley could not separate one from the other. Her mother had died protecting her, had chosen suffering over security because the security would have been temporary, and the suffering bought time for the inheritance to remain intact. It was a sacrifice that seemed both impossibly noble and utterly heartbreaking, the kind of love that hurt to receive because it came at such tremendous cost. Howard gave her time to cry and then explained what happened next. The DNA verification would take 3 days. Once her identity was legally confirmed, everything would transfer into her name completely. No restrictions, no limitations, no oversight except what she chose to impose on herself. The wealth would be hers to use, invest, or destroy, however she saw fit. Howard strongly recommended she take time to educate herself before making major decisions. Wealth without understanding was a recipe for disaster, as many lottery winners and sudden inheritors discovered too late. I can recommend tutors and advisors, Howard said carefully. People who can teach you what you need to know without trying to control your decisions or manipulate you into investments that benefit them more than you. You are about to become an extraordinarily wealthy woman, and that will attract people who want to separate you from your money. You need to be able to recognize them and protect yourself. Ashley wiped her face with tissues. Howard provided and forced herself to focus, despite the emotional overload threatening to shut down her ability to think clearly. I want to learn everything. Business management, real estate, investments, all of it. And I want to start a fashion brand. That was my dream before everything fell apart. I want to create clothes that make women feel valuable and confident, the way I never felt in my marriage. Can you help me find people who can teach me both sides? The business part and the creative part? Howard smiled, the first genuine warmth she had seen from him. I can absolutely help with that. You have good instincts, Ashley. Your mother would be proud of how you are approaching this. The next 3 days passed in a blur of hotel rooms and paperwork and phone calls. The DNA results came back confirming what they all already knew. The inheritance transferred into her name, with all the legal documentation necessary to make it absolutely binding and incontestable. Ashley became a wealthy woman overnight, though she did not feel wealthy. She felt terrified and overwhelmed and desperately afraid of making mistakes that would squander what her mother protected. She rented a modest apartment in Brooklyn, refusing Howard's suggestions that she buy something more appropriate to her new status. She did not want a mansion or a penthouse or anything that would attract attention before she was ready. She wanted space to think and learn without being observed or judged. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, good light, and enough room to work. That was sufficient. Howard arranged introductions to 3 individuals who became her informal education committee over the following months. The first was Patricia Brennan, a woman who spent 30 years managing corporate turnarounds before retiring wealthy and respected. Patricia was blunt, unsentimental, and brilliant at explaining how businesses actually functioned beneath the mythology they presented to the public. She taught Ashley to read financial statements, understand cash flow, recognize when companies were healthy versus when they were pretending to be healthy, and ask the questions that revealed truth instead of accepting the answers designed to hide it. The second was James Rothstein, a real estate developer who built his fortune buying undervalued properties in emerging neighborhoods and holding them through multiple economic cycles. James taught her how to evaluate locations, understand zoning laws, calculate renovation costs, negotiate with contractors, and most importantly, recognize when a property was worth the investment versus when it was just a beautiful trap that would drain money forever. The third was Louise Hart, a fashion industry veteran who ran a successful design house for decades before selling it and becoming a consultant for emerging brands. Louise understood both the creative vision necessary for great design and the brutal commercial reality of trying to sell clothes in a competitive market. She taught Ashley about fabric sourcing, manufacturing processes, pricing strategies, distribution channels, and the 1,000 small details that separated brands that survived from brands that burned brightly and vanished. Ashley absorbed everything like someone who had been starving and finally found nourishment. She studied for 10 to 12 hours daily, reading books Patricia and James recommended, practicing sketches and patterns with Louise's guidance, attending industry events where she observed without drawing attention to herself. She was building foundations that would support everything that came after, and she approached the task with obsessive focus because failure was not acceptable. Her mother had died protecting this inheritance. Wasting it would dishonor that sacrifice. During these months of education, Ashley never contacted the Short family or attempted to see Matt. She knew through public records that he had not filed for divorce, apparently deciding that ignoring her absence was easier than dealing with the paperwork and potential scandal. The Shorts told people she was traveling or visiting family when anyone asked, maintaining the fiction that their marriage was intact, even if she was physically absent. Ashley let them believe whatever they wanted. She was busy becoming someone they would not recognize, and their ignorance was useful. She also began sketching designs that had lived in her mind for years, refining them with Louise's guidance into something commercially viable while maintaining the creative vision that made them special. Her concept was clear. She wanted to create sophisticated, beautifully constructed clothing for women who appreciated quality but did not have unlimited budgets. Not cheap clothes, but not inaccessible either. Pieces that would last, that were made with care, that respected the women who wore them by prioritizing their comfort and confidence over trends that would be irrelevant next season. Louise challenged her constantly, pushing back on ideas that were too expensive to manufacture or too complex to produce reliably or too niche to find sufficient market. But she also encouraged the elements that made Ashley's vision unique. The attention to construction details that most contemporary brands ignored. The focus on flattering real women's bodies instead of creating clothes that only looked good on models. The commitment to paying workers fairly and maintaining ethical production practices, even when cutting corners, would increase profit margins. You are going to struggle to compete with fast fashion on price, Louise warned during one of their sessions, and you will struggle to compete with luxury brands on prestige. You are aiming for the middle, which is where fortunes can be made, but also where most brands die. You need to be exceptionally good at everything to succeed in that space. Then I will be exceptionally good, Ashley replied. her voice carrying a certainty that surprised both of them. One afternoon in late winter, Patricia spread financial statements across Ashley's dining table. Documents from 3 clothing manufacturers Ashley was considering for her first production run. The numbers looked reasonable at first glance, but Patricia tapped one statement with her pen and waited. "Tell me what you see." Ashley studied the pages, scanning revenue, expenses, profit margins. Everything appeared solid. They all looked profitable. "This one has the highest margins." "Look deeper. What are they not showing you?" Ashley stared until her eyes burned, frustration building. She had been studying for months and still could not see what Patricia saw instantly. She was about to admit defeat when something caught her attention. The cash flow timing. The company with the highest margins also had payment terms that stretched 90 days, while their own supplier payments were due in 30. They were profitable on paper, but constantly scrambling for cash to cover the gap. "They are going to miss production deadlines," Ashley said slowly, working through the logic. "Even if they want to deliver on time, they will not have cash to buy materials when they need them. They will delay my orders to manage their own survival." Patricia smiled, genuine pleasure in her student's breakthrough. "Now you are thinking like someone who will not get destroyed by a pretty balance sheet. Trust numbers, but understand what the numbers are not saying. That skill will save you millions over your lifetime." That moment crystallized everything Ashley had been learning. She was not just memorizing facts. She was developing instincts that would protect her from people who use complexity to hide truth. She spent the rest of that day analyzing the other manufacturers with new eyes, finding problems she would have missed weeks earlier, choosing the partner who was honest about their limitations rather than the one who promised perfection they could not deliver. By the time winter became spring, Ashley had transformed from the frightened woman who left the Christmas party into someone who could speak confidently about business strategies and fabric weights and profit margins. She had learned to project authority when necessary, while remaining humble enough to admit when she did not understand something. She had built a network of relationships with people who respected her seriousness and willingness to learn. She was ready to launch Holloway Atelier, the brand that would establish her as someone worth noticing in a city that noticed very little. But she was also ready for something else, something Patricia identified during one of their sessions when she looked at Ashley carefully and asked a question that changed the trajectory of everything. "You are learning all of this for a reason beyond just starting a fashion brand. What are you really preparing for?" Ashley met her eyes steadily. "I am preparing to destroy the man who treated me like I was disposable. I'm preparing to take everything he took for granted and make him understand that cruelty has consequences. And I am preparing to do it legally, ethically, and so thoroughly that he will never recover." Patricia smiled. "Good. Then let us talk about strategic acquisition and corporate warfare. Because if you are going to destroy someone, you should do it properly." Chapter 6. The Rise of Holloway Atelier. The difference between revenge and justice, Ashley learned, was that revenge felt good immediately, while justice required patience to feel good forever. She spent 8 months building Holloway Atelier from concept to reality, pouring $2 million of her inheritance into the launch while keeping the vast majority of her wealth in reserve. The money went toward leasing a showroom in Soho with soaring ceilings, a natural light that made fabrics look honest instead of flattering, hiring 6 seamstresses whose combined experience exceeded a century, and sourcing materials that met her standards for quality without destroying her margin for error. Everything was calculated, measured, planned, with the kind of attention to detail that separated successful launches from expensive failures. The seamstresses she hired were all women pushed out of other design houses when younger workers became fashionable and experience became irrelevant. They were in their 50s and 60s, women whose hands knew fabric in ways that could not be taught, whose eyes could see construction flaws invisible to everyone else. whose patience for perfection had been honed over decades of making clothes for people who could afford to demand excellence. Ashley paid them significantly more than industry standard and treated them like the skilled craftspeople they were, instead of interchangeable labor. In return, they produced work that justified every dollar she invested. The showroom itself became her statement of intent. Not a boutique trying to impress with luxury, not a warehouse trying to compete with fast fashion, but a gallery space where clothes were displayed like art because she believed they deserved that respect. Clean lines, minimal decoration, furniture that welcomed people to sit and consider instead of rushing them through transactions. She wanted customers to feel valued rather than pressured, to understand that buying from Holloway Atelier meant participating in something built with care, rather than just acquiring another garment to discard next season. The first collection consisted of 24 pieces, each one designed to work with the others, while standing alone. Dresses that flattered without demanding impossible bodies. Jackets that combined structure with comfort. Trousers that acknowledged women needed pockets and mobility, not just silhouettes. Everything was crafted to last, with seams that would not split after 3 washes, and fabrics that improved with age rather than disintegrating. The price points were high but not astronomical, positioned precisely where quality-conscious women could justify the expense by calculating cost per wear over years instead of months. Louise helped her organize a launch event that invited fashion journalists, boutique buyers, and women whose taste influenced others without requiring celebrity status. No grand spectacle, no models walking runways, just beautiful clothes displayed thoughtfully and an evening that respected people's intelligence instead of trying to dazzle them into submission. Ashley moved through the crowd, speaking with genuine interest about why she created what she created, listening to feedback, answering questions about construction and sourcing with specifics that proved she understood every aspect of what she was selling. The response exceeded her hopes. Several fashion journalists wrote reviews praising the collection's maturity and craftsmanship, contrasting it favorably with the disposable trends dominating contemporary fashion. Boutique buyers placed orders substantial enough to keep her seamstresses working at capacity for months. Women who attended the launch returned with friends, then returned again alone, becoming customers who valued what Holloway Atelier represented as much as the clothes themselves. Within 3 months, the brand had a waiting list. Within 6 months, major fashion magazines featured her designs in editorial spreads. Within 9 months, Ashley was being invited to industry events where her presence was valued rather than tolerated, where people wanted her opinions and sought her collaboration. She attended everything, networking with strategic focus, building relationships that would matter when the time came to use them. She was careful to keep her married name buried completely. Professionally, she was Ashley Holloway, designer and businesswoman, with no mention of Matt Short or the year she spent invisible in his mansion. When people asked about her background, she said simply that she came from a textile family and learned the industry from the ground up, which was technically true even if it omitted significant details. Nobody pressed for specifics because her work spoke for itself, and in fashion, current relevance mattered more than historical biography. The Short family remained oblivious to her transformation. They did not follow fashion news, and Matt certainly never paid attention to his wife's dreams or interests. To them, she was still the poor girl who walked away from her marriage and disappeared into whatever obscurity awaited people foolish enough to reject security. They had no idea that Ashley Holloway, the designer mentioned occasionally in business journals they skimmed but never read carefully, was the same woman they dismissed so thoroughly. But Ashley paid close attention to them. She subscribed to commercial real estate newsletters and business publications. She attended investment conferences where real estate deals were discussed and rumors spread more freely than in formal settings. She learned that Short Properties, while still considered a major player by people who did not look closely, was showing cracks in its foundation that would soon become chasms. Thomas Short's health had declined significantly. He suffered several smaller strokes after the initial major one, each one stealing more of his capacity to manage the company he built over 40 years. Control passed to Matt by default, because Thomas structured everything around family succession, and the board of directors had no mechanism to prevent it, despite Diane's increasingly desperate objections. Matt's leadership proved exactly as disastrous as anyone paying attention could have predicted. He made terrible investments based on relationships rather than analysis, trusting college friends with no relevant experience because they flattered his ego and borrowed his money. He alienated key business partners through a combination of missed meetings, broken promises, and casual insults delivered when he was drunk enough to forget diplomacy. He borrowed aggressively against properties that should have been held free and clear, mortgaging the family's stability to cover losses from failed ventures. Every decision compounded previous mistakes until the company's financial situation became genuinely precarious. Ashley absorbed all of this information without acting, patient as winter ice forming on deep water. She expanded her own portfolio strategically, using her real estate knowledge to acquire properties in emerging neighborhoods where value was poised to increase substantially. She joined boards of charitable organizations and cultural institutions, building relationships with old money families whose influence shaped the city's economic landscape in ways that never appeared in newspapers. She moved through elite circles with growing confidence, no longer the outsider looking in, but a participant whose opinions mattered. At a Metropolitan Museum gala one evening, she found herself in conversation with Lawrence Pemberton, who had been Thomas Short's business partner decades ago before a bitter falling out ended their relationship permanently. Pemberton was in his 60s now, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of intelligence that saw through pretense immediately. He asked her about Holloway, Atelier, and listened to her answers with genuine interest before steering the conversation toward real estate and investment strategy. They discovered a natural alignment in how they approached business. Both valued careful analysis over impulsive decisions. Both believed in building sustainable operations rather than chasing quarterly gains. Both understood that reputation mattered more than short-term profits because reputation determined who would work with you when opportunities arose. By the end of the evening, Pemberton suggested they stay in contact, and Ashley agreed immediately, recognizing that an alliance with someone of his experience and connections would prove invaluable. Over the following months, Pemberton became both mentor and collaborator. He taught her the subtler aspects of corporate maneuvering, the tactics that operated within legal boundaries but could devastate unprepared opponents, how to use leverage points in complex deals, how to structure acquisitions that protected you from liability while maximizing control, how to recognize when someone was vulnerable and how to exploit that vulnerability without crossing ethical lines that would damage your own standing. He also shared something equally valuable, his complete lack of sympathy for the Short family and his willingness to help ensure their downfall. Thomas Short betrayed me when he thought I was vulnerable, Pemberton explained over dinner one evening, stole a deal I had developed and used our partnership agreements to claim it was joint work. When I tried to fight him, he used his connections to freeze me out of projects until I had to walk away and rebuild from nothing. It took me 10 years to recover what I lost. I have been waiting for an opportunity to return the favor ever since. If you are planning what I think you are planning, I want to help. Through Pemberton and her own expanding network, Ashley learned the full scope of Short Properties' deteriorating situation. The company was carrying too much debt at variable interest rates that climbed as the economic climate shifted. Cash flow was insufficient to service the obligations. Multiple properties were mortgaged beyond reasonable limits. The business partners who sustained them for decades were quietly withdrawing, unwilling to risk their own capital on Matt's leadership. Banks were getting nervous about exposure to short properties' declining creditworthiness. Most damaging was Matt's reputation. The Christmas party incident had been recorded on multiple phones and shared through social circles. Investors who witnessed his public humiliation of Ashley or heard about it second-hand found it distasteful enough to reconsider doing business with him. Others had their own experiences of his arrogance and unreliability. His father's sterling reputation had protected the company for years, but Thomas was too diminished to shield them anymore, and Matt's personal failings were finally having commercial consequences. Ashley recognized that short properties was approaching a crisis point where intervention could either save them or finish them completely. She began positioning herself to be the only intervention available, which meant systematically closing every other door Matt might use to escape his problems. She contacted potential investors he approached and offered them better opportunities through her own ventures. She used her growing influence to have short properties quietly excluded from deals where her connections mattered. She built walls around him without ever confronting him directly, patient and methodical, letting him feel the pressure without understanding its source. During this period, her phone rang late one evening with a number she did not recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail, but something made her answer. Diane Short's voice came through the speaker, carefully controlled but laced with a desperation that would have been unthinkable during Ashley's marriage. Ashley, this is Diane Short. I hope you are doing well. I wondered if we might speak about Matthew and your marriage. Perhaps there is some way to resolve the situation that would benefit everyone involved. The audacity was breathtaking. The woman who treated her like a servant was now calling to ask for help. Ashley let the silence extend until it became uncomfortable before responding in a voice that revealed nothing. Mrs. Short, I appreciate your reaching out. I wish your family well in their endeavors. I hope you find the solutions you are looking for. Take care. She ended the call before Diane could respond, blocking the number immediately. There would be no reconciliation, no negotiation, no mercy. The time for those possibilities had passed on a Christmas night in a ballroom full of witnesses when Matt told her to clean his shoes. Everything that happened from this moment forward was consequence, and Ashley had learned patience enough to let consequences unfold at their proper pace. Chapter 7. The Systematic Destruction. Power, Ashley discovered, was not about control, but about understanding which threads to pull, so the entire tapestry unraveled exactly as you intended. Her fashion brand continued expanding, while she quietly built a parallel empire in real estate and strategic investment. The two pursuits complemented each other perfectly. Holloway Atelier gave her visibility and credibility in social circles that valued creativity and entrepreneurship. Her investment activities gave her access to the financial networks where actual power concentrated. She moved between both worlds fluidly, someone who could discuss fabric weights with designers at lunch and commercial property valuations with investors at dinner. Respected in both spheres because she proved competent in ways that transcended simple wealth. The turning point came when Ashley learned through her network that Short Properties had taken out a massive variable rate loan using their headquarters building as collateral. The building was their last truly valuable asset, the operational center of everything they did, and Matt had mortgaged it to cover losses from other failed ventures. When interest rates were low, the loan seemed manageable, but rates had climbed steadily, and now the monthly payments consumed most of their cash flow. They were one bad quarter away from default, and everyone who understood their situation knew it, except apparently Matt himself, who seemed convinced that his next deal would solve everything. Ashley began meeting regularly with Pemberton to plan their strategy. They needed Short Properties to fail completely, not just struggle temporarily. That meant preventing any rescue that might let them reorganize and survive. It meant systematically eliminating every option Matt had to raise capital or restructure debt. It meant building pressure from every direction until collapse became inevitable. The key, Pemberton explained during one of their planning sessions, is to make everyone believe they are avoiding risk by refusing to help him, rather than that they are being manipulated into refusing. If people think we are actively sabotaging him, some will help out of sympathy or principle. But if they independently conclude he is a bad investment, they will walk away without hesitation. So Ashley did not tell people to avoid Matt. She simply shared information that let them reach their own conclusions. When potential investors approached her for opinions about short properties, she provided factual assessments of their debt load, cash flow problems, and management issues without editorializing. The facts spoke for themselves. When banks considered extending additional credit, Ashley's contacts at other financial institutions quietly shared their concerns about short properties' viability. Concerns based on legitimate analysis rather than personal vendetta. She was particularly effective with women investors who had their own stories of being dismissed or underestimated by men like Matt. She did not need to explicitly mention what he did to her. The story had circulated widely enough that most people in her circles knew generally what happened, even if they lacked specific details. When these women asked her perspective on short properties, her careful neutrality communicated more than active criticism would have. They understood she had reasons to be biased, and yet she was providing objective analysis anyway, which made the analysis more credible rather than less. The walls closed in on Matt over a period of months. Investors he courted chose other opportunities. Banks he approached declined to extend additional credit. Business partners he relied on announced they were restructuring their own portfolios and would not be participating in future short properties ventures. Every door that might have provided relief closed quietly, and Matt could not understand why his luck had turned so completely bad. His behavior deteriorated in proportion to his stress. He drank more heavily, made worse decisions, lashed out at the few people still willing to work with him. The social obligations he used to enjoy became ordeals, where he showed up late and drunk, offending people whose goodwill he needed. His parents watched helplessly as he destroyed what Thomas spent decades building. Unable to intervene because the corporate structure Thomas created specifically to keep control within the family now prevented them from removing Matt, even as he drove them toward ruin. The final crisis arrived when the bank holding the mortgage on Short Properties' headquarters building sent formal notice. They had missed 2 monthly payments. If they could not bring the loan current within 90 days or negotiate a restructuring that required massive capital injection, the bank would foreclose and auction the property to recover their losses. The notice became public record, which meant it appeared in the commercial real estate publications everyone in the industry monitored. Short Properties' financial crisis was now visible to anyone paying attention. Matt's desperation reached levels that would have been pathetic if they were not so deserved. He called everyone he had ever done business with, begging for loans or investments or any help at all. He promised returns he could not possibly deliver. He made commitments he had no way to fulfill. He burned through whatever remaining credibility he possessed, asking people to risk their money on his leadership, and nearly everyone declined. One call in particular destroyed what little composure he had left. Richard Blackwell, a man who had been his father's closest friend for 30 years, a man whose children played with Matt as boys, answered the phone with the warmth of old friendship. Matt explained the situation, voice shaking, asking for a bridge loan that would buy him time to restructure. The silence that followed stretched unbearably before Richard's voice came back cold and final. "Matthew, I watched you humiliate your wife at that Christmas party. I watched you treat her like she was nothing while she stood there taking it because she had nowhere else to go. That told me everything I needed to know about your character. Whatever is happening to you now, you earned it. Do not call this number again." The line went dead. Matt sat alone in his father's office, surrounded by decades of photographs showing Thomas with the men who built New York alongside him, and understood that those relationships were gone. His father's legacy was not an inheritance he could access. It was a door that closed permanently when he revealed who he truly was, beneath the expensive suits and private school education. He poured himself a drink with shaking hands, the first of many that night, and called Diane into the office. She appeared in the doorway looking older than he had ever seen her, and when he told her about Richard's rejection, about the others who had said similar things, she did not comfort him. She just stood there with an expression of disgust and resignation. You did this. Not the economy, not bad luck, not Ashley. You, and now your father will die knowing his son destroyed everything he built. I hope whatever satisfaction you got from being cruel to that girl was worth it, because it cost us everything else. She left him alone in that office, and Matt drank until the room spun, until he could not remember why he started drinking, until oblivion was the only escape from understanding what he had become. The few who might have helped out of loyalty to Thomas Short were unwilling to defy the broader sentiment that Matt was unsalvageable. Diane attempted to take control herself, but the legal structure prevented it without board approval, and Matt had stacked the board with friends who owed him favors and were unwilling to vote against him, even as the situation became obviously dire. She tried to negotiate directly with the bank, but they had no reason to show mercy to a family whose son had squandered every advantage handed to him. She even attempted to sell the family mansion to raise capital, only to discover Matt had already mortgaged it months ago without telling his parents. There was no equity left to extract. The bank announced the auction date. Friday afternoon, 45 days from the notice, at the Continental Hotel. The headquarters building would be sold to the highest bidder, and whoever bought it would control the infrastructure that made Short Properties functional as an ongoing concern. Without that building, the company was essentially dead. It would be too expensive to relocate, too complicated to rebuild the systems and relationships concentrated there, too damaging to their already fragile credibility. Losing the building meant losing everything. The announcement attracted significant media attention because the Short family's downfall had become a compelling narrative. The business press covered it as a cautionary tale about privilege squandered and competence assumed rather than earned. Social media discussed it as karma for Matt's treatment of his wife, though most people did not know Ashley was the same person as Ashley Holloway, the successful designer. To them, it was just a satisfying story about a cruel man facing consequences. Ashley prepared for the auction with meticulous care. She arranged financing far exceeding what the building was worth, ensuring she could outbid any legitimate competitor. She had her legal team at Whitmore and associates prepare all necessary documentation for rapid post-auction acquisitions. She coordinated with Pemberton on a strategy for systematically purchasing every remaining Short Properties asset over the following weeks. She was not just going to win the auction. She was going to dismantle their entire operation and leave them with nothing but debt and humiliation. The night before the auction, Ashley stood in her Brooklyn apartment, looking out at the city lights stretching to every horizon. She thought about her mother, about the Christmas party, about the years of being treated as disposable. She thought about the woman she used to be and the woman she had become. Tomorrow, everyone would know both versions. Tomorrow, Matt Short would understand exactly what he destroyed when he chose cruelty over basic humanity. She did not sleep that night. She sat at her table, sketching designs she would never make, keeping her hands busy while her mind prepared for what was coming. When dawn finally arrived, Ashley dressed in a black suit from her own collection, elegant and powerful, every line calculated to project the authority she had earned. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone her mother would have been proud of. That was enough. Chapter 8. The Revelation. Some moments change everything that comes after them. But Ashley learned that the most powerful moments were the ones you built slowly until they became inevitable. The Continental Hotel ballroom filled early with real estate developers, investment firm representatives, journalists covering the story, and curious observers who wanted to witness the final chapter of the Short family's decline. The auction house set up their podium and display materials, while attendees took seats or stood in clusters discussing the building's value and likely bidders. Cameras lined the walls because the media recognized this was more than a commercial real estate transaction. It was theater, downfall, and public accounting for private cruelty, all compressed into whatever happened when the gavel fell. Matt arrived exactly on time, which suggested someone other than him planned his schedule. He was accompanied by Diane and two lawyers who looked like they were attending a funeral rather than representing a client. Matt's transformation shocked people who remembered him from even a year earlier. He had lost significant weight, not from healthy choices, but from stress and alcohol abuse. His expensive suit hung loosely on a frame that seemed to have collapsed inward. His face was gaunt, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights and constant anxiety. His hands shook slightly when he sat down, a tremor he tried to hide by clasping them together but could not quite control. Diane sat beside him, rigid with barely contained fear. Her aristocratic composure, that carefully maintained facade of superiority that defined her for decades, had cracked beyond repair. She looked older and diminished, a woman watching everything she valued crumble while being powerless to stop it. The mansion where she raised her son would be sold if this auction went badly. The lifestyle she took for granted would evaporate. Everything Thomas built would be gone, because their son proved incapable of managing what was handed to him. Thomas himself was not present. He remained at home, confined to a wheelchair and struggling with speech, aware of what was happening but unable to bear witnessing it directly. A private nurse stayed with him, keeping him comfortable in the house he would soon lose because Matt had mortgaged it without permission or understanding of consequences. The auctioneer began with explanations of terms and conditions, speaking in the measured professional tone of someone who conducted these proceedings regularly and found nothing special about any individual transaction. The building was being sold as is, with all existing leases and obligations attached. The opening bid was set at $120 million, based on outstanding loan balance and estimated distressed sale value. Multiple parties had registered to bid, indicating strong interest despite the circumstances. The bidding began immediately. Several development companies made opening offers, testing the waters and gauging competition. The price climbed steadily. At $130 million, two smaller bidders dropped out. At $140 million, a Russian development consortium entered aggressively, clearly intending to acquire the property regardless of cost. At $150 million, most of the remaining bidders fell away, leaving three serious contenders: the Russian consortium, a Dubai-based investment firm with extensive New York holdings, and a group represented by lawyers who had not revealed their client's identity. Matt watched the numbers climb with visible agony. Each $1 million represented not just money, but history, legacy, his father's life work being sold off to strangers. Diane gripped her purse with white knuckles, staring straight ahead, her face composed into a mask that revealed nothing, even as everything inside her was screaming. Neither of them could do anything but watch. They had no capital to bid, no way to stop what was happening, no control over their own future. At $160 million, the Russian consortium hesitated before bowing out. They had reached their predetermined limit and saw no reason to continue bidding against determined competitors. The price continued climbing between the Dubai firm and the anonymous participant. At $170 million, reporters leaned forward with renewed interest. At $175 million, the Dubai representatives huddled in whispered consultation. The auctioneer called for additional bids once, twice. The tension in the room became physical, people barely breathing while waiting to see if the Dubai firm would continue. Just before the final call, a woman's voice from the back of the ballroom cut through the silence with perfect clarity. $200 million. Every head turned in unison. Ashley walked down the center aisle, moving with unhurried confidence, the crowd parting naturally to let her pass. She wore her black suit like armor, her hair swept back elegantly, her bearing radiating the kind of authority that came from knowing exactly who you were and what you were worth. She looked directly at Matt as she approached the front, her eyes never leaving his face. For several seconds he did not recognize her. The elegant woman moving toward him bore no resemblance to the frightened person he dismissed from his life 2 years ago. Then understanding dawned across his face in stages, confusion giving way to disbelief, giving way to horror as he realized who he was looking at. His mouth opened but no sound emerged. Beside him, Diane turned to see what had frozen her son and went equally still when she recognized Ashley. The auctioneer, unaware of the personal drama unfolding before him, confirmed the bid in his professional tone. $200 million from Ms. Holloway. Do I hear $210 million? The Dubai firm consulted briefly, evaluating whether to continue against someone willing to substantially overpay for personal reasons rather than commercial logic. After 30 seconds of discussion, their lead representative shook his head. At $200 million, they were out. The price exceeded reasonable value by too much to justify continuing. The auctioneer called once, twice, 3 times. The gavel fell. The headquarters building of Short Properties now belonged to Ashley Holloway. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters surged forward shouting questions while cameras flashed continuously. Ashley ignored all of it, walking directly to where Matt sat frozen in his chair. She stopped 3 feet away, close enough for conversation, but far enough to maintain perfect dignity. Diane rose halfway from her seat, as though to intervene, but seemed unable to complete the motion, trapped between impulse and recognition that she had no power here. Ashley spoke clearly enough that everyone nearby could hear despite the noise, her voice carrying no anger or triumph, just absolute certainty. This is only the beginning, Matt. Over the next few weeks, I will systematically acquire every asset of value that Short Properties owns. I will buy your mortgages. I will purchase your remaining properties. I will own the mansion where your parents live. And I will do all of it legally, ethically, and completely. Matt's voice cracked when he finally managed to speak. Why? Why are you doing this? Because you told me to clean your shoes in front of everyone, and I said no. Because you treated me like I was disposable for 3 years. Because you had a wife who would have loved you, and you responded with contempt. Now you will learn what it means to be powerless while someone else controls everything. Diane found her voice, though it came out smaller than Ashley had ever heard it. Ashley, please, we can discuss this. Surely there is some arrangement that would satisfy everyone. My husband built that company over 40 years. It is his entire life. Ashley turned to face her former mother-in-law with eyes that held no sympathy. You sold me to your family for $50,000, Mrs. Short. You treated me like a servant. You told me education was wasted on people who lacked breeding and intelligence. You stood by while your son degraded me daily and said nothing in my defense. You do not get to ask for mercy now when you showed none then. The lawyers flanking Matt attempted to interject, suggesting that perhaps this discussion should occur in private. But Ashley spoke over them without raising her voice. There is nothing to discuss. Everything that happens from this moment forward is consequence, and consequences are not negotiable. She signed the purchase documents while Matt sat paralyzed with shock and Diane stood trembling with rage and fear. The transaction completed in minutes. Ashley received the deed and all associated rights. She thanked the auctioneer professionally, nodded once to Pemberton, who watched from the back with satisfaction, and walked out through the chaos with the same elegant composure she arrived with. Behind her, Matt finally collapsed forward, his head in his hands. sobbing in a way that drew uncomfortable glances from people nearby. Diane sat beside him, rigid and silent, her mind racing through options that did not exist, searching for solutions to a problem that had already been decided. The lawyers gathered their materials and left quickly, unwilling to be associated with a situation so publicly disastrous. The story exploded across every media platform before the auction even officially concluded. Reporters who made the connection between Ashley Holloway and Ashley Gardner Short wrote articles framing it as revenge, justice, karma, depending on their perspective. Social media celebrated the narrative of a powerful woman destroying the man who abused her. Women's organizations used it as an example of what was possible when women refused to accept degradation. The coverage was overwhelming and nearly universal in supporting Ashley's actions, recognizing cruelty repaid with consequence rather than revenge for its own sake. Matt and Diane returned to the mansion that evening, knowing it would not be theirs much longer. Thomas was awake when they arrived, his eyes asking questions his damaged speech could not form. Diane told him everything in the quiet of his bedroom, watching her husband's face crumble as he understood the magnitude of what their son had destroyed. That night, 3 generations of the Short family sat in a house they were about to lose, surrounded by possessions that would soon be liquidated, facing a future they could not imagine and did not want. Ashley went home to her modest Brooklyn apartment and sat alone in the silence, feeling nothing resembling triumph or satisfaction, just exhaustion and the weight of having done what needed to be done. She thought about calling someone to celebrate, but realized she did not want celebration. She wanted her mother. She wanted Miriam to know that the sacrifice had mattered, that the inheritance was not wasted, that her daughter survived and became strong enough to protect herself. But her mother was gone, and all Ashley could do was honor her memory by using her strength wisely rather than cruelly. Tomorrow, she would begin the systematic acquisition of everything Short Properties owned. Tomorrow, the real work would start. But tonight, she allowed herself to sit quietly with the knowledge that she had faced the man who tried to break her and proved that he failed. Chapter 9. The Auction. The second auction happened exactly 3 weeks after the first, though this time it was not the bank forcing the sale, but Ashley offering an opportunity, and the difference mattered more than anyone initially understood. After acquiring the headquarters building, Ashley moved methodically through her plan. She purchased the mortgages on every remaining Short Properties asset from banks eager to unload risky debt. She bought the loan on the Short family mansion directly, becoming their landlord overnight. She acquired contracts and business relationships that held value, transferring them into her own expanding portfolio. Each transaction was legal, documented properly, and structured to withstand any challenge. She did not cheat or manipulate. She simply used leverage that Matt created himself through years of poor decisions. The business press covered her acquisitions extensively. Ashley Holloway, previously known primarily as a successful fashion designer, was revealed to be a sophisticated investor with resources that dwarfed what most people assumed. Journalists dug deeper into her background and discovered the Holloway textile fortune, though the full details of her inheritance and her mother's sacrifice remained private. The story became even more compelling when reporters connected all the pieces. The wife humiliated publicly was now the woman systematically dismantling her husband's empire. Matt tried repeatedly to meet with her. He showed up at her office building, but security prevented him from entering. He sent letters through lawyers that went unanswered. He attempted to reach her through mutual acquaintances who politely declined to serve as intermediaries. He was being erased from the business world, exactly as he erased her from his life, and the symmetry was perfect, even if brutal. During these 3 weeks, Ashley also did something unexpected. She did not simply strip Short Properties of everything valuable and walk away. She began restructuring the operation, bringing in competent management, addressing the systemic problems that predated Matt's disasters. She was not saving the company for his benefit. She was protecting the employees who did nothing wrong beyond working for terrible leadership, and ensuring that the properties and contracts she acquired maintained value rather than collapsing. But she saved one asset for last. Short Properties held development rights for a mixed-use project approved by the city years ago under Thomas Short's leadership, but never executed due to lack of financing. The project was potentially lucrative, but it required massive capital investment and expertise that Matt never possessed. If completed, it would generate substantial returns. If abandoned, the city would award the contract to another developer and sue Short Properties for breach of contract. The penalties would be large enough to force complete bankruptcy, with personal liability extending to Thomas and Diane's remaining assets, including the small trust funds they relied on for medical care and basic survival. Ashley structured a deal that was technically open to any qualified bidder. She would provide financing, expertise, and resources necessary to complete the project, but only to a partner who won an open bidding process for the development rights that Short Properties still controlled. The terms were clear and public. The winning bid would receive full financial backing from her consortium, and the project would proceed successfully. The losing parties would face contract penalties and likely bankruptcy. She announced the bidding event for a Friday afternoon at the Grand Livingston Hotel, the same venue where the Christmas party occurred 2 years earlier. The symbolism was intentional and not subtle. Media coverage exploded immediately. This was not just a business transaction, but theater. Justice delivered publicly. The completion of a narrative arc that had gripped public attention for weeks. Matt understood he had no choice but to participate. If he did not win the bid, his family would lose everything that remained. But he also understood he could not win a competitive bidding war. He had no capital, no credibility, no way to compete against serious developers in normal terms. His only hope was that Ashley would show mercy, would accept a low bid from him rather than force complete destruction. It was a desperate hope with no rational foundation, but desperation was all he had left. The ballroom at the Grand Livingston Hotel was even more crowded than the previous auction. Television cameras lined the walls because this had transcended business news and become a cultural story about power, gender, consequence, and the ways wealth could be used for justice or revenge, depending on your perspective. Journalists packed the back rows. Business leaders and social observers filled the remaining space. Everyone wanted to witness the conclusion. Ashley arrived early and took her seat in the front row, flanked by Pemberton and her legal team. She wore a charcoal grey suit, elegant and understated, her bearing calm and professional. She did not smile or acknowledge the attention focused on her. She simply waited with perfect composure for what came next. Matt arrived with his parents. Thomas was in a wheelchair pushed by a private nurse they could barely afford anymore. Diane walked beside them, looking smaller and older than Ashley remembered, her aristocratic bearing gone completely. They took seats along the side of the room, unwilling to be in the direct spotlight but unable to stay away. Matt sat apart from them, isolated by shame and fear, his hands shaking constantly now, his eyes red from sleepless nights and crying he could not control. He looked like a man who had already lost everything, but could not stop fighting, because surrendering meant admitting the truth about himself. The bidding began with several small developers offering token amounts, clearly present just to witness the spectacle rather than seriously compete. At $5 million, most dropped out. At $10 million, only 3 remained. A development firm from Boston making a legitimate bid, an investment group from Chicago with strong city connections, and Matt Short, representing the last gasps of Short Properties. The Boston firm bid $15 million. The Chicago group countered with $17 million. Matt, reading from notes his lawyers prepared, offered $18 million in a voice that barely carried across the room. His bid was backed by nothing real, just promises and desperation, but the rules required accepting all bids until someone could not fulfill the terms. The bidding continued climbing. At 20 million, the Boston firm dropped out. At 24 million, the Chicago group began slowing down, evaluating whether the price had exceeded rational value. Matt bid 25 million, pledging assets he did not have and performance he could not deliver. His voice cracked on the number. The Chicago group consulted extensively before bidding 28 million, pushing past what they considered reasonable but unwilling to walk away without ensuring they had exhausted all options. Matt stared at his lawyers desperately, but they shook their heads. There was nothing left to pledge. No way to credibly offer more. He had reached his limit. The auctioneer called once, twice for additional bids. The silence extended painfully. Matt's 25 million bid was no longer the highest. The Chicago group would win at 28 million unless someone intervened. Matt would lose everything. His parents would face bankruptcy. Thomas would die knowing his life's work was destroyed by his son's incompetence. The reality of complete failure settled over the family like a shroud. The auctioneer began the final call. Just before the gavel fell, Ashley stood. She did not announce a higher bid. Instead, she walked to the podium, and the auctioneer yielded immediately, recognizing that whatever happened next would define the entire event. Ashley turned to face the crowd, her voice clear and steady through the sound system. I am prepared to award the development partnership to Mr. Short and provide full financial backing on one condition. The ballroom went completely silent. Every camera focused on her. Matt sat frozen, afraid to hope and unable to stop hoping. Ashley continued, her eyes finding Matt across the room. The same condition you gave me 2 years ago in this building. You must clean my shoes publicly and apologize sincerely for every moment of cruelty you inflicted during our marriage. Do that here now, in front of everyone present, and the partnership is yours. Refuse, and I will ensure Short Properties collapses completely with personal bankruptcy for your entire family. The weight of the ultimatum pressed down on everyone present. This was not business anymore. This was accountability delivered publicly. The scales of justice balanced with perfect symmetry. Cameras captured Matt's face as he processed what was being asked. Thomas made a sound from his wheelchair, something between a sob and a groan. Diane covered her face with both hands. The seconds stretched unbearably. Matt tried to speak several times but could not form words. Finally, Thomas's nurse wheeled him closer to his son. Thomas reached out with his functioning hand and gripped Matt's arm, his eyes conveying everything his damaged speech could not. Do it. Save what can be saved. Your pride is worth nothing. Diane lowered her hands from her face and nodded, unable to look at her son but making her position clear. There was no choice. Not really. Everything they had left depended on Matt's willingness to publicly humiliate himself the same way he publicly humiliated his wife. Matt stood on trembling legs and walked toward the podium where Ashley waited. The cameras followed his every step. His face was wet with tears he did not bother wiping away. He reached Ashley and stopped, looking at her face for the first time in years with something resembling recognition that she was human. Ashley sat in the chair the auctioneer vacated and crossed her legs, extending one foot slightly. Her expensive heel, from her own collection, waited within easy reach. Matt dropped to his knees on the ballroom floor, his expensive suit pressing against marble that offered no mercy or comfort. Chapter 10. Clean My Shoes. There are moments that define who you become after everything breaks, and Matt Short learned that sometimes the only path to redemption begins with your knees on cold marble and your pride in pieces at your feet. He knelt before his wife while hundreds watched and cameras recorded. Ashley waited with infinite patience, her foot extended, her expression revealing nothing. The silence was absolute, broken only by Matt's ragged breathing and the mechanical sounds of cameras capturing everything. Matt pulled a handkerchief from his pocket with shaking hands and began cleaning her shoe. His movements were clumsy, unpracticed, tears dripping onto the marble and onto the leather he was polishing. When he finished the first, Ashley silently extended her other foot, and he repeated the process. When both shoes gleamed, Matt pressed his forehead to the floor in front of her, a gesture of complete submission that no one had asked for, but that seemed necessary. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I am sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." "Louder," Ashley said quietly. "Everyone needs to hear this." Matt raised his head slightly, still on his knees, his face destroyed by crying. He spoke louder, the words tumbling out. "I treated you like you were nothing. I insulted you every day. I made you stand in corners while my friends laughed at you. I never gave you money or respect or basic human kindness. I told you to clean my shoes in front of everyone because I thought I was powerful and you were disposable. You offered me partnership and I gave you contempt. You deserved love and I gave you cruelty. Every single thing I did to you was wrong. I destroyed the only good thing in my life because I was too much of a coward to face my own emptiness." He pressed his forehead to her feet, his entire body shaking. "I am sorry for every second of pain I caused you." Ashley let the moment stretch until it became almost unbearable, then stood. Matt remained on his knees, unable to rise without permission. "This is not about revenge, Matt. This is about you understanding that cruelty has consequences. For 3 years I was invisible to you. Today everyone sees exactly who you are. That is justice, not revenge." She turned to address the cameras and crowd. "I am not doing this for satisfaction or pleasure. I'm doing this so every woman watching knows that being treated as disposable is not something you have to accept forever. Power can be reclaimed, dignity can be restored, and the people who hurt you can be held accountable." She paused, then continued with the terms. "The development partnership will proceed under joint leadership. My consortium will provide all financing and operational management. Short Properties will contribute their existing contracts and rights. Thomas and Diane Short will keep their medical trust funds and remain in the mansion for the remainder of their lives, with ownership transferring to a foundation that helps women leaving abusive situations." Ashley extended her hand to help Matt stand. He stared at it, unable to comprehend the gesture after everything that happened. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached up and let her pull him to his feet. She looked into his eyes and spoke quietly, words meant only for him. "I am not forgiving you. Forgiveness requires trust rebuilt over years through changed behavior. What I am offering is a chance to become someone worth forgiving. Work for it every day. Prove through actions that you can be better than what you were. The world will watch. I will watch. And if you fail again, there will be no third chance." Then Ashley addressed the crowd one final time, delivering the speech that became legendary. "My mother died protecting my inheritance. She chose suffering over security because security would have been temporary, and suffering bought time for something lasting. Every woman here knows someone who made similar sacrifices. Mothers who worked multiple jobs. Wives who stayed silent during abuse to keep families together. Daughters who surrendered their dreams so siblings could pursue theirs. This is not unique to me. This is the common experience of women who hold the world together while the world tells them they are worth less." She paused, letting the words land. "I had resources that most women do not have. Money that let me fight back in ways that would not be possible otherwise. But the principle applies regardless of wealth. You are not defined by how others treat you. You are defined by how you respond when given the chance to reclaim yourself. Do not accept degradation as permanent. Do not believe cruelty is inevitable. And do not let anyone tell you that demanding respect is unreasonable." The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. Matt stood off to the side, watching the woman he married and never truly saw, finally understanding what he had casually destroyed. When the applause faded, Ashley walked out of the Grand Livingston Hotel alone, refusing interview requests. Just a woman who had done what needed doing and wanted to go home. She returned to her modest Brooklyn apartment and sat in the quiet with her mother's letter, reading Miriam's words again and letting herself cry for everything that was lost and everything that survived. The photograph of Miriam sat on the mantel, capturing a moment of joy from before cancer and poverty and sacrifice. Ashley touched the frame gently and whispered to her mother across the years that separated them. "I did it, Mom, I survived, and I used what you gave me to become strong instead of cruel." Outside her window, the city continued its endless rhythm. Somewhere in that vastness, Matt Short sat in a house that no longer belonged to him, facing a future he would have to earn instead of inherit. Whether he would rise to that challenge or collapse under its weight remained to be seen. But for the first time in his life, the choice was entirely his, and the consequences would be his alone to bear. Epilogue. 7 years later. Time does not heal all wounds, but it can teach you which scars to wear with pride and which to let fade until they become stories you tell about someone you used to be. Ashley stood in the penthouse office overlooking Manhattan, watching the sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. Holloway Atelier had expanded far beyond her initial dreams, now operating boutiques in 6 cities and employing over 200 people. The development project she forced Matt to fight for had completed successfully, revitalizing an entire neighborhood and generating returns that funded her foundation, helping women escape abusive situations. She served on multiple corporate boards, advised emerging designers, and used her wealth strategically to create opportunities for people the system overlooked. Her assistant knocked and entered, carrying the morning's correspondence. Among the usual items was a handwritten letter with familiar handwriting that still made her pause, even after all these years. Matt wrote to her every month, had done so for the entire 7 years since that day in the ballroom. He never asked for responses, and she never sent any, but he continued writing anyway, documenting his transformation with the patience of someone who understood that proving change required years, not moments. She opened this letter standing by the window, reading his words in the early morning light. He was sober now, had been for years after that first brutal year of relapses and failures. He attended meetings twice weekly and would for the rest of his life, understanding that addiction was not something you defeated once, but something you managed forever. He had taken a position with a small community development non-profit, working for a salary that would have horrified his younger self, helping build affordable housing in neighborhoods that desperately needed it. He wrote about his parents. Thomas had died peacefully years ago. Diane had softened considerably in her final years, spending time volunteering at the foundation Ashley created, working directly with women whose stories resembled Ashley's own. She apologized repeatedly before she passed, seeking forgiveness Ashley was still learning to offer. The letter ended, as all his letters ended, with an acknowledgement that he did not deserve her forgiveness, but continued working to become someone who might someday earn it. He signed it simply Matt, without titles or presumptions. Ashley folded the letter and placed it with the others she kept in a locked drawer. Dozens of them now, a chronicle of someone trying to claw his way back to decency. She had watched his progress from a distance, never responding but always aware, protecting herself from vulnerability while acknowledging that real change was occurring. Her phone rang. Howard Whitmore's voice came through, warm and grandfatherly. "Ashley, I hope I am not calling too early. I have some news." Matt Short received the Community Development Excellence Award from the Mayor's office for his work with affordable housing initiatives. The ceremony is next week. Ashley absorbed this in silence, feeling complicated emotions she could not quite name. Pride that he had genuinely changed. Grief for the years they lost to his cruelty. Curiosity about whether enough time had passed to risk reopening doors she closed for self-protection. Are you planning to attend? Howard asked gently. I do not know. Should I? That depends on what you want, my dear. He has worked for 7 years to prove he changed. At some point, you will need to decide if the proof is sufficient or if no amount of evidence will ever be enough. Both answers are valid, but you should choose consciously rather than letting time make the choice for you. She spent the week considering her options. When the day arrived, curiosity and something deeper pulled her out the door. She slipped into a seat near the back where she could observe without being observed. Matt sat in the front row looking uncomfortable with the attention, wearing a simple suit, his posture suggesting someone who had learned humility the hard way. When his name was called, he walked to the podium and spoke about the work with genuine passion, crediting his team extensively. He mentioned that he came to this work from a place of profound personal failure, that getting the chance to contribute something positive felt like grace he did not deserve, but would work every day to honor. His eyes scanned the audience, and when they found Ashley near the back, he stopped mid-sentence. For several seconds, he just looked at her, his expression cycling through surprise and hope and fear. Then he gathered himself and continued speaking, though his voice had changed slightly, softer and more vulnerable. I want to say something that might seem out of place at this ceremony, but it matters to me that it be said publicly. 7 years ago, someone I hurt very badly gave me a chance I did not deserve. She could have destroyed me completely and been justified in doing so. Instead, she offered me an opportunity to become better if I was willing to work for it. Everything good that came after began with that moment of mercy. He did not say her name. He did not need to. Ashley felt hundreds of eyes turn toward her. She met Matt's gaze across the distance and nodded once, acknowledging his words without committing to anything more. After the ceremony, Matt caught up with her in the hallway. He approached carefully, maintaining respectful distance. Thank you for coming. I did not think you would. I almost did not. Can we talk? Just for a few minutes. There is a coffee shop around the corner. Public, safe, you can leave whenever you want. She studied his face, seeing the lines that 7 years of sobriety and genuine effort had carved there. 10 minutes. That is all I am promising. They sat across from each other at a small table. Matt wrapped his hands around his cup to keep them steady. I do not expect forgiveness, Matt began quietly. I know what I did was unforgivable. I destroyed years of your life because I was too broken to see you as human. But I wanted you to know that I understand what I did. I understand the harm. I understand that my cruelty was a choice I made every single day. And I am sorry in ways I will never be able to adequately express. They sat in silence for a while. Ashley felt something shifting inside her, some wall she built for protection beginning to develop cracks. I have been asked out on dates over the years, Ashley said quietly. I never said yes because I could not imagine trusting someone again after what you did. You took something from me that might never fully come back. I know. I'm sorry. But I also know that I cannot live the rest of my life defined entirely by what you did. At some point, I have to decide whether your cruelty destroyed my capacity for connection or whether I am stronger than that. Matt looked at her directly. It is real. I cannot prove it in one conversation or even 1 year, but I will keep proving it every day for as long as it takes. And if you decide after all that proof that it is still not enough, I will accept that and keep trying to be a good person anyway, because the change is for me and for my children, not just to win you back. I do not know if I can love you again. I do not know if I even want to try. Then start from nothing. Get to know me as if we just met. Let me show you who I am now instead of trying to resurrect who we were. And if at any point you decide it is not worth your energy, walk away. I will understand. 1 coffee per week, she said finally. Public places. No expectations beyond conversation. I want to see if the person you have become is someone I can respect, separate from everything that happened before. 1 coffee per week. I can do that. Thank you, Ashley, for giving me even that much. They talked for another hour, the 10 minutes extending naturally as conversation became easier. When they parted ways, Ashley walked back to her office, feeling lighter than she had in years, though also more uncertain. She was opening a door she closed for good reasons, and there was no guarantee what waited on the other side would be worth the risk. But she was done letting fear make all her decisions. The weekly coffees continued for months, then years. Matt showed up every time, punctual and present, sharing stories about his work and his children and his ongoing therapy. He never pushed for more than she offered, just kept showing up and being honest, letting her see him at his worst moments and his best. Ashley found herself looking forward to those coffees more than she wanted to admit. The attraction was different now, built on respect and shared understanding rather than desperate chemistry. It was steadier, deeper, more conscious of everything that could go wrong and choosing to risk it anyway. When they finally decided to try something beyond coffee, it was slow and careful. Two people moving toward each other across a battlefield of old wounds and hard-won healing. Their first real date was dinner, where they talked until closing. Their first kiss happened weeks later. Their first night together came months after that, and it was nothing like the empty marriage they used to have. It was connection built on genuine intimacy. Two people choosing each other with full awareness of their history. They remarried quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. Just the two of them, and Howard Whitmore serving as witness. In a small ceremony that felt right precisely because it carried no expectations beyond the promises they made. Matt cried through his vows, and Ashley held his hands steady while he spoke about gratitude and transformation. She promised to keep her heart open even when it scared her, to believe in the possibility of change while staying vigilant. They built a life together that honored both their past and their future. Ashley continued running Holloway Atelier. Matt continued his community development work, committed to making a genuine difference in communities that needed support. They attended therapy together and separately, committed to doing the work that sustainable love required. It was not a fairy tale. It was something better. It was two people who had been broken finding ways to heal together while maintaining their individual wholeness. It was proof that cruelty could be survived, and that people could change, and that forgiveness was possible when earned through years of genuine effort. On their 5th anniversary of remarrying, Matt gave her a gift that made her cry. It was a photograph from the Christmas party, the moment when she walked away from him across the ballroom. He had tracked down the image and had it framed with an inscription he wrote himself. "This is when I lost everything, and when you began to save yourself. Thank you for eventually saving me too." Ashley hung it in their home, where she could see it daily, a reminder of where they came from and how far they had traveled. Years later, when Ashley was old and surrounded by the success she built and the family she chose and the legacy her mother protected, she would remember standing in that attic, holding her mother's envelope and believing she had nothing left. She would remember the transit worker who shared his sandwich. She would remember Howard Whitmore's kindness and Pemberton's alliance. She would remember the moment Matt knelt before her and finally understood what he had destroyed. But mostly she would remember that she survived, that she transformed pain into purpose and trauma into strength, that her mother's sacrifice mattered because it gave her the resources to not just survive, but flourish, and that the inheritance of dignity once claimed could never be taken away again.